I stared at the suitcases piled haphazardly in the driveway, my hands trembling as I tried to comprehend how my entire life had somehow been reduced to 3 battered pieces of luggage. The mid-October wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes already raw from crying. Theodosia. My father's voice was firm behind me. I've already called you a cab. I turned to face him, searching for any trace of the man who had once carried me on his shoulders, who had patiently taught me to ride a bike, who had held my hand at my mother's funeral just 13 months ago. Instead, I found only a stranger, his features hardened with a resolve I couldn't penetrate. Dad, please. This was Mom's house too. You can't just. It's my name on the deed, Theodosia, he interrupted, his tone clipped. And Vivian and Brooke are moving in tomorrow. We need the space. Space. I repeated the word, the absurdity of it all striking me anew. Our 4-bedroom Victorian had more than enough room for all of us. This wasn't about space. This was about his new wife not wanting any reminders of her predecessor. You're 23, he continued, checking his watch. It's time you stood on your own feet anyway. Most people your age don't still live with their parents. Most people my age hadn't spent the last year of college remote learning while caring for their dying mother, either. Most people hadn't put their lives on hold to be there for a father drowning in grief, only to watch him emerge from it by falling into the arms of his executive assistant 6 months later. I bit back these retorts. They'd get me nowhere. I'd already tried reason, pleading, even anger. None of it had penetrated the wall he'd built between us, a wall constructed of equal parts guilt, infatuation with Vivian, and what I suspected was relief at finally being able to move on from the painful memories this house contained. The cab should be here any minute, he added. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice. He shrugged. You've got that job at the library. Start there. Get an apartment. As if it were that simple. As if my part-time position shelving books could possibly cover rent in this overpriced town. As if I hadn't been planning to go to graduate school before Mom got sick and everything changed. The yellow cab pulled up to the curb, its arrival as ominous as a funeral hearse. I've given you $2,000, my father said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. That should be enough to get you started. $2,000. The sum felt simultaneously generous and insulting, enough to assuage his guilt but not enough to truly help me establish a new life. I took the envelope, nonetheless. Pride couldn't pay for a hotel room. Goodbye, Dad, I said, the words catching in my throat. I wanted to say more, to remind him that Mom would be heartbroken to see him treat me this way, to ask how he could so easily discard 18 years of bedtime stories and birthday celebrations and Christmas mornings. But the hard set of his jaw told me it would be futile. He nodded stiffly, then turned and walked back into the house, our house, without another word. I heard the door close with a decisive click that felt like the period at the end of a chapter. The cab driver helped me load my suitcases into the trunk, his eyes curious but mercifully free of pity. Where to, miss? I gave him the address of the only place I could think to go, my mother's best friend, Eleanor Whitaker. At 62, Eleanor was semi-retired from her law practice but still kept an office downtown where she handled select cases. She and my mother had been inseparable since college, and she had been a second mother to me in many ways. If anyone would take me in without question, it would be Eleanor. As the cab pulled away, I allowed myself one glance back at the house where I'd grown up. My bedroom window on the second floor seemed to stare back at me accusingly, as if asking why I hadn't fought harder to stay. But what could I have done? Chained myself to the banister? Called the police on my own father? I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall freely now that I was hidden from my father's gaze. I thought of the last conversation I'd had with my mother, just days before she died. She'd been so weak by then, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take care of him, Theo," she'd said, her fingers featherlight in mine. "He won't know how to live without me at first." I'd promised I would. And I had tried, cooking his favorite meals, making sure he got out of bed and went to work, listening to him talk about Mom late into the night when he couldn't sleep. But then Vivian had entered the picture, sweeping in with her perfectly highlighted hair and her efficiency and her ability to make my father smile again. And suddenly, I wasn't needed anymore. Worse than that, I was in the way. Eleanor lived in a brownstone near the university, its brick facade softened by the Virginia creeper that had claimed one entire side of the building. The cab driver unloaded my bags onto the sidewalk, and I paid him with some of my father's guilt money, overtipping in a desperate bid for good karma. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding. What if she wasn't home? What if she didn't want to deal with my problems? What if? The door swung open, and there stood Eleanor, her silver hair pulled back in its usual neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She took one look at me, tear-streaked face, suitcases at my feet, and her expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "Oh, Theo," she said, opening her arms. I fell into them like a child, fresh tears spilling over. "He kicked me out," I managed between sobs. "Dad kicked me out so Vivian and her daughter can move in." Eleanor's body stiffened against mine, but her voice remained gentle. "Come inside, dear. Let's get you settled, and then you can tell me everything." Her living room was exactly as I remembered it, book-lined walls, a plush sofa that had seen better days but remained incredibly comfortable, and the scent of Earl Grey tea perpetually in the air. She made me sit while she prepared a fresh pot, returning with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of shortbread cookies. "Now," she said, settling beside me. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the whirlwind romance between my father and Vivian, how they'd gotten married just 3 weeks ago in a private ceremony I hadn't even been invited to. How Vivian had started subtly rearranging our house, moving my mother's things into storage, replacing family photos with abstract art. How her 17-year-old daughter, Brooke, had looked at my bedroom with undisguised covetousness during their first visit. And then today, he just told me to leave, I finished, staring into my half-empty mug. Said they need the space. As if there aren't 4 bedrooms in that house. Eleanor's face had grown progressively stonier as I spoke. Now, she set down her mug with deliberate care, as if afraid she might otherwise throw it. "Your father was always a bit self-absorbed," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "But this is beyond the pale." I shrugged helplessly. "He's different now. It's like Mom died and took the best parts of him with her." "Grief does strange things to people," Eleanor conceded. "But it doesn't excuse this behavior." She reached for my hand. "You'll stay here, of course. For as long as you need." Relief washed over me. "Thank you," I whispered. "I don't know what I would have done." "You never have to find out," she interrupted firmly. "This is your home now." That night, curled up in Eleanor's guest bedroom beneath a hand-knitted afghan, I allowed myself to really feel the full weight of what had happened. My father had chosen his new wife over me. He had looked me in the eye and cast me out without hesitation. The pain of it was physical, a persistent ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I reached for my phone and pulled up a photo of my mother, one taken about 2 years ago, before the cancer diagnosis. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her dark hair, the same shade as mine, catching the sunlight. She had been so beautiful, so full of life. What would she think if she could see what had become of our family? A notification sound pulled me from my thoughts. A text from my father. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. I hope someday you'll understand that this is for the best. Love, Dad." No apology for the abruptness of my eviction. No acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Just a vague hope that I'd eventually see things his way. I turned off my phone without responding. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Eleanor moving about the kitchen. For a disorienting moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and I felt the same hollow ache in my chest. I pulled on the clothes I'd slept in and padded into the kitchen. Eleanor was already dressed in one of her smart pantsuits, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she scrolled through something on her tablet. "Good morning, dear," she said without looking up. "There's coffee in the pot and bagels in the toaster." "Thanks." I poured myself a cup, grateful for the normalcy of the routine. "You're dressed early. Do you have court today?" "No," she said, finally glancing up. "But I do have some research to do at the office. I'd like you to come with me, if you're feeling up to it." "Research about what?" Eleanor set down her tablet, fixing me with a penetrating gaze. "Theodosia, there's something I need to tell you. Something your mother asked me not to share until it became necessary." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" She sighed. "Your mother came to see me professionally about 3 months before she died. She wanted to make sure certain provisions were in place. For you." I frowned. "What kind of provisions?" "Legal ones." Eleanor removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. She suspected this might happen, not the specifics, perhaps, but she worried that your father might not prioritize your well-being after she was gone. The bagels popped up in the toaster, making me jump. Neither of us moved to retrieve them. "What exactly did she do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "She made a will," Eleanor said simply. "And she included some stipulations that your father apparently hasn't adhered to. But before we go down that road, I need to gather all the relevant documents. Hence, the trip to my office." Hope flickered in my chest, small but persistent. "So there might be a way for me to go back home?" Eleanor's expression softened. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to determine exactly what legal recourse we have. But yes, there might be a way to secure what's rightfully yours." An hour later, we were in Eleanor's office downtown. The space reflected its owner, elegant but unpretentious, with comfortable leather chairs and walls lined with legal texts. Eleanor moved with purpose, pulling files from cabinets and folders from drawers, occasionally muttering to herself. "Here we are," she said finally, setting a thick folder on her desk. "Evelyn Mercer's last will and testament." My mother's name in Eleanor's precise handwriting sent a pang through my heart. I watched as Eleanor opened the folder, revealing pages of legal language. "Your mother was a smart woman," Eleanor said as she scanned the documents. "And she knew your father better than anyone. She suspected that he might remarry quickly. He's never been good at being alone, and she wanted to make sure you were protected." "Protected how?" Eleanor flipped to a specific page and pushed it toward me. "This clause states that the house, which, contrary to what your father told you, was owned jointly by both your parents, was to be held in trust for you. Your father could continue living there, but he could not sell it or permanently remove you from the premises without triggering certain consequences." I stared at the document, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. What consequences? In that event, the house would pass directly to you, and your father would be required to vacate within 30 days. My mouth fell open. Are you serious? Entirely. Eleanor's eyes glinted with something that looked almost like satisfaction. Furthermore, there's a separate trust fund that was set aside for you, specifically for your education and living expenses. Your father was named as trustee, but with the stipulation that if he failed to act in your best interests, the trusteeship would pass to me. I sat back, stunned. But how? I mean, Dad said his name was on the deed. How could Mom leave me the house if it wasn't hers to give? That's the thing, Theo. I pulled the property records this morning. Eleanor slid another document across the desk. The house was purchased jointly by both your parents. Edward may have chosen to lie to you about that, but the legal record is clear. Anger flared in my chest, hot and sudden. He lied to me. He looked me in the eye and lied. I suspect he's been making many questionable decisions lately, Eleanor said dryly. But this one we can challenge. How? We file a petition with the probate court, asserting that Edward has violated the terms of Evelyn's will. We ask for enforcement of the trust provisions and, if necessary, for me to be appointed as the new trustee of your educational fund. She leaned forward, eyes intent. But Theo, I need to be clear about something. This will mean taking your father to court. It will be public. It will be contentious. Are you prepared for that? The question gave me pause. Was I ready to publicly challenge my father? To air our family drama before a judge? The thought was daunting. But then I remembered the cold dismissal in his eyes as he'd handed me that envelope of cash. The ease with which he'd discarded me to make room for his new family. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm prepared. Eleanor nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Then let's get started. The following weeks were a blur of legal preparations. Eleanor worked tirelessly, drafting motions and gathering evidence. She reached out to the executor of my mother's estate, a longtime family friend who had, apparently, been unaware of my father's actions. He was appalled and immediately pledged his support to our case. Meanwhile, I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. I continued working at the library, grateful for the distraction of shelving books and helping patrons. I set up a small workspace in the corner of Eleanor's guest room, where I began researching graduate programs again. Life went on, even as the legal machinery ground slowly forward. My father texted occasionally, superficial messages asking if I was settling in or telling me about the weather, as if we were distant acquaintances rather than father and daughter. I responded with equal brevity, never mentioning the legal proceedings that were about to upend his comfortable new life. Finally, the day of our court hearing arrived. I woke up feeling nauseated with anxiety, my stomach a knot of nerves. Eleanor had suggested I wear something conservative and professional, so I'd opted for a simple navy dress that had belonged to my mother. It felt like armor against what was to come. Ready? Eleanor asked as we stood in her living room, both of us clutching our respective bags like shields. No, I admitted. But let's go anyway. The courthouse was an imposing stone building in the center of town, its steps well-worn by generations of seekers of justice. Eleanor navigated the corridors with the ease of long familiarity, guiding me to the correct courtroom with gentle touches to my elbow when I faltered. We were early, by design. Eleanor wanted us to be seated and composed before my father arrived. But as we approached the designated courtroom, I saw him already waiting outside, and he wasn't alone. Vivian stood beside him, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression one of barely contained fury. And next to her was a man in an expensive suit whom I recognized as Martin Caldwell, one of the most prominent attorneys in town. "They've lawyered up," I whispered to Eleanor. "Of course they have," she replied, unfazed. "Martin's good, but he's not infallible. Especially not when he's on the wrong side of a case." My father spotted us then, his face darkening. He said something to Vivian, who glanced our way with undisguised hostility. For a moment, I faltered. Was this really worth it? The pain, the confrontation, the permanent fracturing of what remained of my family. But then I remembered my mother's will, the care she'd taken to protect me, even knowing she wouldn't be there to see it through. I thought of how she would have felt, knowing her husband had cast their only child out of the home they'd built together. And my resolve strengthened. Eleanor and I approached, stopping a few feet away from my father and his entourage. "Edward," Eleanor greeted him coolly. "Vivian." "Eleanor," my father replied, equally frigid. "I have to say, I'm disappointed in you. Taking advantage of my daughter's emotional state to pursue this frivolous claim." Eleanor's eyebrow arched. "Is that what you tell yourself? That Theo's distress is merely an emotional state? Not a natural response to being evicted from her home by her own father?" Vivian stepped forward, her voice pitched low but intense. "Edward has every right to decide who lives in his house. Theodosia is an adult. It's time she started acting like one instead of running to mommy's friend with tales of woe." I felt heat rush to my face, anger bubbling up. "You don't get to talk about my mother. Not ever." "Ladies," Martin Caldwell interjected smoothly, "perhaps we should save this discussion for inside the courtroom. Judge Reynolds doesn't appreciate emotional displays." "An excellent suggestion," Eleanor agreed, her tone making it clear she was conceding nothing. "Shall we?" The courtroom was already filling with people, lawyers, court staff, other litigants waiting for their cases to be called. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table, while my father, Vivian, and Martin settled at the defense table directly across the aisle. I kept my eyes fixed forward, unwilling to catch my father's gaze. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Sandra Reynolds presiding. Judge Reynolds was a formidable woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She scanned the courtroom as she took her seat, then nodded to the bailiff. "First case, in the matter of the estate of Evelyn Mercer. Are all parties present?" "Yes, Your Honor," Eleanor and Martin responded almost in unison. "Very well. Ms. Whitaker, as petitioner's counsel, please proceed." Eleanor rose, her posture impeccable. "Your Honor, we're here today because the respondent, Edward Mercer, has violated the express terms of his late wife's will. Specifically, he has attempted to remove their daughter, Theodosia Mercer, from the family home, which was owned jointly by Edward and Evelyn and which Evelyn's will clearly designated as Theodosia's inheritance." She approached the bench, handing up several documents. "I've submitted copies of the relevant portions of Evelyn Mercer's will, along with the property deed showing joint ownership. I've also included affidavits from the executor of Evelyn's estate and from Theodosia herself, detailing the circumstances of her eviction." Judge Reynolds examined the documents carefully, her expression giving nothing away. "Mr. Caldwell, your response?" Martin stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the existence of Mrs. Mercer's will, we contest the interpretation being presented by Ms. Whitaker. The will grants my client continued residence in the home and grants his daughter inheritance only upon his death or voluntary departure. Nowhere does it state that he cannot ask his adult daughter, who is fully capable of supporting herself, to find her own accommodation. That's not accurate, Your Honor, Eleanor interjected. If I may direct your attention to Clause 7b of the will. As the legal arguments flew back and forth, I found my attention drifting to my father. He sat stiffly beside Martin, his jaw set in a stubborn line I knew all too well. But there was something else in his expression too, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Did he know he was in the wrong? Did he care? Vivian, meanwhile, looked increasingly agitated. She whispered furiously to Martin at several points, her face flushing when Eleanor brought up certain details of my mother's will. I wondered what she had expected when she married my father. Had she truly thought she could simply erase all traces of his previous life, including his only child? Ms. Mercer, Judge Reynolds's voice startled me out of my thoughts. Would you please approach the bench? I glanced at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. On shaky legs, I walked forward to stand before the judge. Ms. Mercer, I'd like to hear from you directly, Judge Reynolds said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Can you tell me in your own words what happened the day your father asked you to leave the family home? I swallowed hard, feeling all eyes in the courtroom on me. I came home from work to find my suitcases packed and on the driveway. My father told me that his new wife and her daughter were moving in, and that they needed my room. When I reminded him that the house had been my mother's too, he said only his name was on the deed, which I now know wasn't true. I paused, gathering myself. He gave me $2,000 and called me a cab. I've been staying with Eleanor, Ms. Whitaker, ever since. And prior to this incident, had your father given you any indication that you would need to leave the home? I thought about it. Not explicitly. But things had been tense since he married Vivian. There were comments about how I needed to move on with my life and questions about my future plans. But he never directly told me I would have to leave until that day. Judge Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Ms. Mercer. You may sit down. As I returned to my seat, I caught my father's eye for the first time since entering the courtroom. His expression was unreadable, but I thought I detected a flash of something. Regret? Shame? It was gone too quickly to be sure. Mr. Mercer, Judge Reynolds continued, would you approach the bench as well? My father stood, straightening his tie before walking forward. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his mouth deeper, his posture less confident. Mr. Mercer, is your daughter's account accurate? Did you, in fact, pack her belongings and inform her she needed to leave the family home with very little notice? My father cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. But I would like to add some context. Theodosia is 23 years old. She has a college degree. It's natural for young adults to move out and establish their own lives. My wife and I. Your new wife, Judge Reynolds corrected pointedly. My father flushed. Yes. My wife, Vivian, and I felt that it would be beneficial for Theodosia to have her own space. And with Vivian's daughter coming to live with us, we needed the extra bedroom. I see. Judge Reynolds leaned back slightly. And were you aware that your late wife's will specifically designated the family home as your daughter's inheritance? A pause. I was aware that Evelyn had made some provisions, yes. But I understood them to take effect after my death. That is not what the will states, Mr. Mercer. It specifically indicates that while you may continue to reside in the home, you cannot sell it or permanently remove your daughter from the premises without triggering the succession clause. Are you telling me you were unaware of these terms? My father's discomfort was palpable. I may have misunderstood certain aspects of the will. Misunderstood, or deliberately ignored? Judge Reynolds's tone made it clear this was not merely a rhetorical question. Your Honor, Martin interjected, my client acted in what he believed was his daughter's best interest. Independent living is an important step in a young adult's development. Judge Reynolds fixed Martin with a stern look. Mr. Caldwell, I didn't ask for your psychological assessments. I asked your client a direct question about his understanding of his late wife's will. She turned back to my father. Mr. Mercer, did you consult with the executor of your wife's estate before asking your daughter to leave? No, Your Honor. Did you review the will yourself? Not recently. Did you consult with an attorney about the potential legal implications of your actions? No, Your Honor. Judge Reynolds sighed. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. You may be seated. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Reynolds reviewed the documents before her, occasionally making notes. Finally, she looked up. Having reviewed the evidence and heard from the parties involved, I am prepared to rule on this matter. She fixed my father with a stern gaze. Mr. Mercer, I find that you have indeed violated the terms of your late wife's will by attempting to remove your daughter from the family home. As specified in the will, the property therefore passes directly to Theodosia Mercer, effective immediately. My breath caught in my throat. Furthermore, Judge Reynolds continued, I am revoking your trusteeship of the educational fund established for your daughter. That responsibility will now pass to Eleanor Whitaker, as designated in the will's contingency provisions. She paused. You have 30 days to vacate the property. Any personal belongings of yours remaining after that time will be considered abandoned. Do you understand? My father sat frozen, his face ashen. Beside him, Vivian looked stunned, as if she couldn't quite process what was happening. Mr. Mercer, Judge Reynolds prompted. Do you understand the court's ruling? Yes, Your Honor, my father managed, his voice barely audible. Very well. This matter is closed. She struck her gavel, the sound reverberating through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Eleanor squeezed my hand under the table. We won, she whispered. But it didn't feel like winning. As relief and vindication washed over me, I was also struck by a profound sadness. This legal victory couldn't repair my relationship with my father. It couldn't bring back my mother or the family we'd once been. It was justice, yes, but justice tinged with grief. As we gathered our things to leave, my father approached, Martin hovering anxiously behind him. Theo, he began, his voice rough. Don't, I said, more sharply than I'd intended. Just don't, Dad. Please. Just hear me out. He looked broken, all his earlier defiance gone. I made a terrible mistake. I let Vivian convince me that a clean break would be easier for everyone. I should have known better. I should have remembered what your mother would have wanted. Yes, you should have, I agreed. But you didn't. And I don't know if I can forgive that. He nodded slowly, accepting this. I understand. But I want you to know. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I studied his face, searching for the father I'd known, the man who had taught me to ride a bike and held my hand at my mother's funeral. He was still in there, somewhere, beneath the poor choices and the misplaced priorities. I need time, I said finally. I can't just pretend none of this happened. Of course, he said quickly. Take all the time you need. We'll find somewhere else to live. Will you at least let me know when I can come get my things? I'll have Eleanor contact you, I said, unable to commit to seeing him again so soon. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Martin placed a restraining hand on his arm. We should go, Edward. My father hesitated, then nodded. Goodbye, Theo. I watched him walk away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For so long, he had been the center of my world, my protector, my guide, my safe place. Now, he was just a man who had made a grievous error in judgment. A man who would have to live with the consequences of his choices. Eleanor and I walked out of the courthouse together, descending the steps into the bright afternoon sunlight. A sense of unreality washed over me. Was this really happening? Was I really going back to my childhood home, not as a guest at my father's sufferance, but as its rightful owner? What now? I asked Eleanor, feeling adrift despite our victory. Now, she said, linking her arm through mine, we go back to my place and celebrate with a good bottle of wine. And tomorrow, we start planning your return home. I nodded, letting her guide me down the remaining steps. The future stretched out before me, uncertain but full of possibility. I thought of my mother, her strength, her foresight, her love that had reached beyond the grave to protect me. And I felt a surge of determination. I would honor her memory by living the life she had safeguarded for me. I would pursue my graduate studies, make that house truly my own again, and perhaps, in time, find a way to rebuild some kind of relationship with my father. But for now, I would simply breathe, grateful for the unexpected inheritance that had given me not just a house, but a second chance at the future I'd thought was lost to me forever.